This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the circle was red, the study was scarlet, and the Scot was glorious, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the giant rat of Sumatra, the remarkable worm unknown to science, or the repulsive story of the red leech?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 447, Playing Tricks with the Law of England. Well, hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready to play some tricks with me today?
I am thinking of a card.
Wait, I've got
put
it.
Back in the deck. Wait a minute. Okay, what is it?
Joker.
That's correct. How did you know? That's astonishing.
It's just on brand. What can I say?
Amazing. Yeah.
We are inspired, just in general, but specifically for this episode, we are inspired by an article from Bill Hyder out of the spring issue of volume 75 of the Baker Street Journal. That's from this year. It's called Playing Tricks with the Law of England. We'll set it up for you. And then rather than go through Bill's article bit by bit, because this is not a theorist episode, we thought we just would use it as inspiration with you to explore the premise that he puts forth on how Sherlock Holmes treats certain criminals in the canon. So if you would like to support the show, we would encourage you to do so. Monetary and non-monetary ways, you have your options. Let's cover the non-monetary first. Well, you could write back to us. Write us a comment. You could write a comment directly on the show notes at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, or you could email us a comment at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. You could even record an audio clip to your phone and attach that to the email and send it in to us. And maybe if we're inspired, we'll play it on the air. You can also leave us a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to get your podcasts that has reviews. And finally, if you do have some extra change under the cushions of your sofa, why don't you put them in our Nickelodeon here via Patreon or Substack? You can find those links in the show notes, or you can just go to trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles. You can choose how much and how often you contribute, and we would be grateful to have your support. And the bonus for those of you who are paying subscribers is we have extra content for you. We have outtakes. We have Trifling Trifles episodes. There's another one of those coming up shortly. And we have occasional behind-the-scenes stuff that isn't available to other listeners. So check that all out and see what works for you. Well, Burt, you are the culprit here. You're the one who picked this off the shelf and said, this sounds like a good topic to explore. Well, why?
Yeah, why? That's what I want to know. Well, I think because this is one of these perennial topics. You know, we have in the cases of Sherlock Holmes situations that in some cases involve serious crimes, but in other cases less serious crimes. But the thing that links these instances together is that we get to a point where, for one reason or another, Holmes experiences great sympathy or empathy with a perpetrator, and as a result appears to let them go, basically, not to suffer going through the wheels of justice for a variety of reasons. And the nice thing about Bill Hader's take on this is that he's looked at it through the lens of his personal set of ethics and judgments and his understanding of the context in which these things happen. And more often than not, he says, wait a second. I don't know that these people really deserved to get off scot-free at all. And the nice part about it is, in his essay, he says, see what you think, reader. And so that's what we want to say to you as well. See what you think, listener.
And to me, it's an interesting supposition, because for the casual reader or the person who isn't intimately familiar with the Sherlock Holmes canon, Sherlock Holmes as an icon, as a cultural figure, is most often associated with cold, emotionless reasoning. He is a data center, a fact finder, someone who simply wants to get to the bottom of mysteries. And in fact, what we'll discover throughout this is that, well, he could be a big softy when he wanted to. He could see reasons for people committing the crimes they did, whether or not we agree that that's right, ethically or morally acceptable. But he could understand why people made the decisions that they did, and in some cases afforded them a chance to go and correct their errors or atone for their errors, let's say.
Yeah, well said. So we can start right away, really, with the first one that Bill mentions in his essay, which is the Boscombe Valley mystery. Now, for those of our listeners who don't remember what Boscombe Valley mystery is all about, what happens is we meet John Turner, and this is a fellow who went to Australia as a young man, but he became basically a thief, a highwayman. And he came back to England as a rich man and becomes a country squire. But what happens is Charles McCarthy, without Edgar Bergen,
That's right.
shows up, and McCarthy says, McCarthy was one of the gang. He'd witnessed a robbery in which Turner and his gang had killed 4 lawmen. And so McCarthy, he wasn't a member of the gang, but he witnessed this thing. And he puts the squeeze on Turner, blackmailing him, gets a house, gets a land. His ultimate request, though, is that his son should marry Turner's daughter. And that's too much.
That's a step too far for Turner. Yeah.
Step too far.
Yeah. So McCarthy ends up dead, bashed in the back of the head. And it turns out that his son is accused of the crime. And, Holmes goes through all of the steps and knows that it was done by a left-handed person. And McCarthy Jr. is not left-handed. But who is? Turner. Turner committed the crime. Now, he gets the full confession from Turner, gets the story behind what happened here, and decides to let him go because he is elderly and a diabetic and doesn't have long to live beyond that. Effectively, if you sent this guy away, he'd either die when the trial was still going on or he'd die in prison fairly shortly after that. So Holmes figured, well, why not just let him live out his last months in peace, I suppose. What do you think?
Well, one of the issues here, and it's a theme that comes back to us in other cases of Sherlock Holmes, probably in ones we're going to talk about today, is the nuance here is, does the behavior of the victim influence the outcome or severity of punishment for the killer? And in fact, McCarthy is a real blackguard, a real despicable character.
Yeah.
And that's really what I think influences Holmes's empathy or feeling for Turner, who is also, near, particularly in this Victorian age, near to the judgment of a higher power, because he is about to shuffle off this mortal coil.
Well, interestingly, and I'm going to make a bridge to another one of the cases that Bill mentions a little further into the article, but I'll just jump to it now. The idea of McCarthy being a blackmailer, right? This was anathema to what Sherlock Holmes stood for. I don't care who you put him up against. He will always defer to the blackmailer being the worst of criminals. And in another case, specifically Charles Augustus Milverton, that is exactly what we come across. He said, I've had to do with 50 murderers in my time, but none of them makes me feel this creeping sensation the way Milverton does. And with a murderer, they take a person's life, but with a blackmailer, they make a person's life a living hell. And they come back again and again and again to extract their payment. And I think to Sherlock Holmes, that kind of preying on someone was a far worse offense than a one-off, even if it is a murder.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific example. And you can the nice thing about this is that it gives you the opportunity to discuss these sorts of issues that we tend to gloss over in the world of Sherlock Holmes. I don't mean to say we don't take them seriously, but there's an issue here, which is what about this choice to allow a murderer to escape legal consequences? It's not really always black and white, is it? Because, there's an aspect of justice that's, retributive. I mean, it's a retribution for an act. There's also an aspect of justice that's restorative. We're going to, attempt to make people whole or attempt to make the state whole in dealing with this particular case. And, here we have, the question comes down to, does Holmes's higher sense of justice, that Turner's actions were morally justifiable, possibly, given McCarthy's depravity, does that outweigh the fundamental principle of the rule of law? And this, I guess, is a highly academic sort of thing, but, it's an echo of the real world. And it's interesting to put that up against all this stuff.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, recently I heard of, some cases that were under scrutiny for some plea deals being put in place. In other words, the criminals basically cop to their charge. They plead guilty and get a lesser sentence. And effectively, that's what you're looking at here is that, by virtue of confessing to Sherlock Holmes, they get themselves off. If he determines that that's the reason, or that's the way they need to go. Because let's not forget, there are plenty of criminals that he does catch red-handed or does get a confession from, or at least gets to test his theory against what happened and they verify it or not. And yet they still go away. Right? So, and we can have a separate show to talk about those kinds of criminals too. But, I think it does come down to somewhat of a personal values judgment at a certain point, wherever your head or heart happens to be at a particular time, or whatever's happened to you and your particular lived experience, that'll reflect on how, either harshly or leniently a certain criminal is treated if you're in a similar position.
Well, just to close the loop on the Boscombe Valley case, this is a case where Bill Hyder says, if Lestrade had heard Turner's confession and heard about the murders of these 4 lawmen, he would have put the cuffs on the old man without any sentiment. And Bill says, I would have approved. So, so listener, what do you think? And then you get to the Blue Carbuncle, which is another one of these cases. And this is a case where we've got this fellow James Ryder. We find out he's working in a fancy hotel, and he has cooked up a scheme with the Countess of Morcar's maid to steal the famous blue carbuncle. And they frame a poor plumber named James Horner, who's arrested, and Holmes figures it all out. And Ryder is so terrified and begs forgiveness that because it's the season of forgiveness, Holmes lets him go.
Yeah, and just for the record, it's John Horner.
Oh, sorry, John.
Remember
Horner.
little Jack Horner sat in the corner eating his
Right.
Christmas pie, and he pulled out a plumber. So here we know that Holmes lets Ryder go. He says, make him a jailbird now, make him a jailbird for life. But we're still left with poor John Horner sitting in jail during the Christmas season. And there's some kind of wishy-washy. Holmes says, well, the charges will break down against him and he'll eventually come free, rather than, Holmes producing the criminal and allowing Horner to go free immediately. And in this case, Bill says it's that unfeeling attitude toward Horner that kind of makes him feel that Holmes made the wrong decision in letting Ryder go.
Yeah. Well, and it's only one of the improbabilities of the Blue Carbuncle case, because the other improbability is that nobody is ever going to ask Sherlock Holmes where the Blue Carbuncle came from.
If I were the commissioner, Peterson, I'd be asking, because there was £1,000 in it for him because he found it.
Right.
And I would imagine the Countess of Morcar wanted her stone back. So it is. It's a fanciful one, but it's a morality tale. And once again, we have to judge not only Ryder's morality, but Holmes's morality in letting him go. Personally, I think the Christmas feel, that time of the year probably got to Holmes, and I could understand it. And clearly, Ryder was not a career criminal. He did not have the stones to be a career criminal, literally. But I think, given the time of the year, if we can have special dispensation for the holidays, you hear that, kids? If you're going to commit a crime and Sherlock Holmes is coming after you, make sure it's during the Christmas holidays. I think we can let him go on this regard.
Okay. Well, and then what's next?
Silver Blaze.
Oh, Silver Blaze.
Silver Blaze. Now, in this case, we have the murderer captured, right? The horse did the deed. Spoiler alert, kids, if you haven't read Silver Blaze.
Oops.
The horse did it. So what's left for us in terms of who Holmes lets go? Well, it's Silas Brown, who operated a neighboring stable, and one that belonged to a competitor of Silver Blaze's owner. And Silas Brown grabbed the horse and hid him, disguised him. Right now, this is something that in the realm of the sporting world, on the turf, this is something that could get a Silas Brown, a horse trainer, disbarred or disbars for lawyers. You could get him warned off the turf for life. Yeah. So again, not necessarily a realistic thing, but Holmes decides to let it go. And he does explain to Colonel Ross that a neighbor looked after Silver Blaze, but in more of a neighborly manner than I think Silas Brown was intending. So the question is, why should Holmes protect Silas Brown?
Well, yeah, and he is as Holmes says, he's a perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak. And he never really explains his decision. And you can imagine that if he had revealed what Brown did, it might have invalidated the race, and Colonel Ross would have suffered, and this, that, and the other thing. But you really have to do a lot of hand-waving and imagining to to provide some support for the idea of no penalty for Silas Brown.
Yeah. I have a theory.
Oh, what's your
I
theory?
have a theory as to why Holmes protected him. Probably because Holmes would have had to testify before whatever, I don't know if it's a criminal proceeding, but certainly a regulatory proceeding among those of the turf, that he would have gotten called back down from London and would have had to participate in this drawn-out spectacle. And he just wanted to wash his hands of it and be done with it and get the horse back to where it needed to go.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. Interesting.
What's next?
Well, the famous one, of course, is Milverton. Charles Augustus Milverton. You mentioned this earlier, blackmail. So Holmes and Watson break into Milverton's house. They open up his safe. They destroy all the documents. And one of Milverton's victims turns up, and Holmes and Watson are concealed and look on as she shoots Milverton dead and escapes. Now, the problem there, of course, is that they've broken in, and they couldn't explain why they were calling the police. You know, we just happened to be passing by through this window, and look what we found. And so, they may, according to Bill, maybe we need to give them a pass in this case. But on the other hand, they witnessed a murder. But again, this is the question of, does the depravity of the victim make these actions morally justifiable? And I don't know that the Sherlockian writers have spent enough time sort of digging into that.
It's a good question. I mean, it is really it's a philosophical argument for the ages, I think, because ultimately, and you can go one of two ways, or it can go both ways. You can talk about Holmes making this decision because of the depravity of the criminal, right, and acting as judge, jury, and executioner, or at least witness to the executioner himself, not to be confused with witness to the prosecution. Witness for the prosecution. Fine film, by the way. And you also have the debate as to whether Holmes clammed up out of self-preservation. Right? So there's kind of two competing moral and ethical dilemmas here that overlap a bit. Or cancel each other out. I don't know exactly what it is, but either way, it causes Holmes to engage in silence when it comes to stepping up.
Well, and then there's another case, The Veiled Lodger, in which we meet Eugenia Ronder. Very colorful woman. She's a retired circus performer. She knew nothing of life outside the circus, and foolishly enough, she agrees to marry the circus proprietary Ronder, who is just a drunken brute. And after she marries Ronder, she develops a relationship with a circus strongman, and together they put together a plot to kill Ronder. And what happens is the strongman makes this club that looks like a lion's claw. And the idea is that when Ronder goes to feed the lion, they're going to essentially use this club to kill Ronder. So they do that, or Leonardo does that, but the lion breaks loose and Leonardo, the strong man, runs away, and the lion mauls poor Eugenia Ronder horribly, mauls her face beyond all recognition. And so Eugenia and Leonardo were never suspected because it's presumed that the lion had actually killed Ronder. And, there she is. Now, some people think that she should have been turned over to the police, but Holmes feels that no punishment could be worse than what she had already endured.
Yeah, and I think that's backed up. Holmes doesn't turn her over to the police, but also disabuses her of the notion of taking her own life. He tells her, your life is not your own, hands off. And so effectively gives her a life sentence of, living with her disfigurement. And as you say, that is a punishment worse than being turned over to the law. So I do have to have a quick aside here for those of us who are interested in old-time radio. You may remember an old show called Fibber McGee and Molly. And I recall one episode where Fibber McGee is on the phone. You can't hear the voice on the other end. He goes, "Oh, no, really? Your uncle? Clawed by a tiger at the circus?" And, Molly's in the background saying, "Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd." And Fibber gets off the phone and he goes, "Hey, how about that, Molly? They took a picture of his Uncle Claude by the tiger at the circus." Yeah. Anyway, let's move off of this before I maul our audience.
Old radio. You need to go into the closet, McGee.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I need everything falling down on me. A couple of parallel cases here. We've talked about these before. And I want to group them together for the sake of ease here.
Good.
The Sussex Vampire and the Priory School. Here we have two wayward sons, older sons, who have half-brothers in both cases. And in one case, in the Sussex Vampire, you have a crippled older brother who is trying to poison an infant, his infant brother, half-brother, whether it's to maul him or to kill him. It's not clear, but clearly he wants second son out of the picture. In the Priory School, we have a bastard son, James Wilder, who cannot officially be recognized as the heir to the Duke of Holderness, who is jealous of his younger brother, the rightful heir, because of his the line of succession, the way that works, Lord Salter. And he kidnaps Lord Salter, and I suppose is going to hold him for ransom or simply to hold him in some kind of power over the Duke. And in each case, they get a round-the-world trip. Well, actually, I should correct that. Jackie gets a round-the-world cruise. Ryder gets a one-way cruise ticket to Australia to go and make his way in Australia. But isn't it interesting that when given the prospect of potentially losing their younger sons, each of these fathers is presented with a way to exile his older son as a punishment. But not turn them over to the police.
Yeah. That's very good.
No. So, and when it comes to Jackie Ferguson, Holmes, Bill writes that Holmes had the sense to realize that bringing in the police would only make a bad situation worse. Ferguson's beginning to see things clearly and anxious to cope with them. In Holmes's place, I would have done what he did. Nothing. He withdrew from the scene, telling Watson, "I think we may leave them to settle the rest among themselves."
Well, there's another couple of cases that we could group together just in the interests of speed, and those are the Second Stain and the Naval Treaty. And these are both cases that involve high office, senior government officials. What happens in the Second Stain, of course, is that Mr. Trelawney Hope comes to Baker Street, asks for Holmes's help. He's missing a document, a very, very important document. And just to sort of cut to the chase here, Holmes discovers evidence that his wife, Lady Hilda Trelawney Hope, was being blackmailed. There's blackmail again, because of a racy letter she wrote before she was married. Oh, dear. And that's being held over her, and so she has filched a document from her husband's dispatch box. And Holmes manages to return it with a little bit of legerdemain. And everyone winds up being happy. And now Lady Hilda, who committed the crime of stealing the document, is let go free. And, she's the wife of a cabinet minister, and she was being a victim of a blackmailer. And really, she'd done nothing wrong. She'd just written a letter before she was married. And then the Naval Treaty, of course. We've got Percy Phelps, who is copying this document. It disappears. Phelps has a breakdown, and Holmes identifies Joseph Harrison, the potential brother-in-law of Percy Phelps, as the perpetrator. And he catches Harrison, and he gets the document back, and he says, when he's asked what happened, I let my man go, but I wired full particulars to the police this morning, and if they're quick enough, good, that's fine, but if they find the nest empty, well, that's all the better for the government. I bet Percy Phelps and Lord Holdhurst would much rather the affair never get so far as a police court. So there's the horrible Joseph Harrison, let scot-free.
And in that case, it's to avoid a public scandal. In both of those cases. And actually, in one final case, the Beryl Coronet, it wasn't members of the government that were involved, but it was actually a member of the royal family who had entrusted this Beryl Coronet to Holder. And ironically, Holder didn't really do a good job, despite his name, holding on to that item. And who would have been prosecuted? Sir George Brunwell or Burnwell?
Burnwell.
Holder's niece, Mary. She was going to run off with Burnwell. I mean, who would be responsible? And what would the uproar have been in chasing something like that down? It would have caused a huge scandal. So in this case, you have Holmes once again deciding to err on the side of scrutiny and, just being a little more discreet about what happened and letting things settle themselves out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, listeners, what do you think? Should these people all have been permitted to go free? Is that really justified? Let us know.
And whatever you do know, just know to us, it's no trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Now, give me a true account of everything that happened at the Abbey Grange last night. Be frank with me, and we may do some good. Play tricks with me, and I'll crush you.